The more that we tell the truth about our lives, the more that we start to identify these forces that are driving us, the greater the hope that we can change the channel, tell a different story, spend the time to articulate what it is that you want.
From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacey Phillips.
And your host, Jessica Gill.
As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. Part of our manifestation process entails expanding past your limiting subconscious beliefs. Therefore, by tuning into this podcast with interviews from experts, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, scientists, and those with neural manifestation success stories, you're starting the process of expanding your subconscious in order to see to believe that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Expanded. Jessica here. I am so excited about today's guest. She is a huge expander for me. We've had her on the podcast before, and she is chatting about all the things that went into her highly anticipated book on our best behavior, the 7 deadly sins, and the price women pay to be good. Elise Loehnen. When I tell you that understanding the principles that she talks about in this book will have you think about life in a whole nother way, I am not kidding. I feel like this is such a moment in time for this book to come out and really is so in tandem with the To Be Magnetic work. To Be Magnetic's work's even referenced in the book. It's really pulling apart the judgments and the shame and the ways that we are controlling our lives and staying small and looking at all the ways that we don't feel good enough through the lens of these 7 deadly sins and how we use them against ourselves. It is a fantastic conversation. Share it with your friends, your family, your girlfriends, anyone who you think that this will have a deep impact to. And if you haven't heard of Elise before, she's a writer, editor. She's the host of Pulling the Thread podcast. She has ghostwritten and co-written over 12 books, 5 New York Times bestselling, and this is the first book under her own name. So exciting. She was previously the chief content officer for Goop and also co-hosted the Goop podcast and starred in the Goop Lab on Netflix. So let's all dive in. Let's pull back the shadows. Let's look in the hidden crevices. Let's see the way in which we are still not letting ourselves be fully integrated, fully embodied, and start to empower ourselves in a new way. And special To Be Magnetic announcement, we are kicking off our mid-year summer challenge on June 16th. Stay tuned for next week's episode where we're going to talk a little bit more about it and tease out what our plans are for the rest of the year. But trust me, it is going to be a good one. Enjoy. And quick trigger warning for anyone who has experience or is sensitive to discussions around sexual assault, sexual abuse, or molestation. You can skip over the section 4555 to 4615.
And now, a word from our partners.
I've been making a really fun evening ritual around pouring myself a glass of the Ned Mellow Lavender Berry and prepping and doing my To Be Magnetic journaling. So in the morning I can wake up and do a DI and process everything that came up through the night. And it really, really supports my TBM practice because the GABA and magnesium help as well with neuroplasticity and creating those new neural pathways of high self-worth. Did you know that magnesium supports over 300 essential functions in the body, and over 75% of Americans are actually deficient in this mineral? Some signs of magnesium deficiency could cause poor cognitive functioning, headaches, constipation, digestive disorders, fatigue, physical, mental, emotional fatigue, poor sleep quality, muscle spasms, pain, soreness. And magnesium is needed to help regulate your stress hormones like cortisol, which activate when you are in a fight or flight response. That is why it's so important to supplement with a high quality magnesium like Mellow from Ned. Mellow contains 3 forms of chelated magnesium that are further complemented with amino acids, L-theanine, and GABA. So it is supporting the mind, body, and brain where it needs it the most. And Ned has a plethora of other holistic wellness supplements with the same rigor for quality, including their sleep blend with organic high CBN hemp. And their hemp is farmed fully sustainably, organically, in biodynamic farms, and the farmers even play binaural beats for the hemp. So if you are interested in trying any of Ned's products, their Mellow Magnesium or their Sleep Blend CBN, I highly recommend you check them out with the link in the show notes or at helloned.com. And you can use the code TBM15 for 15% off any of your Ned purchases. Again, that's TBM15. And let me know any of the beautiful rituals you might put together with your Ned products.
All right, on to the episode.
One of your first lines in the book, which immediately struck the most strong chord within me, is when you said, you know, you're doing all of these things. You have to be all these things, this certain level of enoughness. And if I get that level of enoughness, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll be protected. Maybe I'll be loved. And I think hearing like, wow, that's it. That's the note. That's the exact note. That is exactly where the workaholism, the busyness, all these things come from. It's like, can I do and fill and accomplish and be capable enough so that I'm at this like pedestal of safety that doesn't exist?
No, it's a big lie. And in writing this book, I sort of arrived at the 7 deadly sins, even though I did not grow up in a religious household. I had to look them up to remember what they were. And then I was like, oh, they're not even in the Bible. I don't know if most people know that, but they weren't in the Bible. But when I landed there, it was because, like you, I think of myself as a strong woman who pushes against these patriarchal tides. And, you know, I'm the primary breadwinner. I'm pushing in my life, high achieving. And I opened the book in my car with my head against the steering wheel after therapy because I had been hyperventilating. And I had this sort of moment in the car where I was like, what is this? What is this oppressive force in my life? What is it? Because I am pushing against what I can see and I'm not getting anywhere. And so it was sort of this moment of like, oh, I get it. I get what it is. It is the psychology of good enoughness, which is distinct from the structure. And so that's where I was like, I know what patriarchy is, but what's the moralizing force? What is in us that we don't see as being in us? What's invisible to us, but insistent, that still has us by the thrall? Because all of the fighting for equity and whatnot is one thing, but there at least was something in me, and I'm guessing people are going to feel this is true of themselves as well. There is a lot of internalized patriarchy in me.
And I think it's also interesting because, well, one, there's this false hope, this kind of false promise, you know, and you touched on it too, which is like, if I just get ahead, if I just push right now, then there will be this almost like grace period where I can relax and have margaritas on the beach and, you know, all the things. And we never really get there. Maybe there's small moments of it, but not in a deep spiritual sense. And then it's like, okay, well, why can I not take those moments now? And at least for me, you know, I'm someone who does internal work all the time. I'm working with therapists. I'm doing the TBM work. I'm aware. When something's coming up, I'm aware. And I've run up upon this dynamic so many times where there will be periods where I see the burnout coming. I see what's going to happen. I can't stop myself from continuing to go. I'm driven by this, but it will impact so many people, or it needs to come out in this timeline, or we have to do it this way. Like, so married to that busyness. And then I'll be like, okay, I got to step back, got to, meditate every day and fill it with this and fill it with this. And then eventually the cycle repeats again. And so it's like, how do we jump off the hamster wheel? And I think your book and the way that you laid out the deadly sins and how we've thought about them and really unpacking them and what it means and how we're upholding it and upholding it within each other, looking at other women, judging other women for how they're acting, performing, showing up in the world, is keeping us in that loop.
Yes, very much. And for people who are like, what are they? I'll give you the order that I write about them in the book: sloth, envy, pride, greed, gluttony, lust, anger. And there was actually an eighth, sadness, which I include in the book as well. So there are multiple things in what you were saying that are happening in us. One, there's this feeling of I'll never do enough. I'll never get there. Therefore, I need to keep doing, the sort of drive against sloth, which is how I start the book, which will be very, particularly for moms who are listening, there's an extra ratcheting up, because not only are you not, if you work outside of the home as well as inside the home, you're never doing enough in either sphere. And there's this desire to find balance or equalize them. So I think you do more here, then you do more here, then you do more, and you're ratcheting up. And we're all ratcheting up, which then drives more anxiety and fear, causing us to ratchet up more, if that makes sense. Like we very much impact each other's lives, which we can get into, particularly with your work, which I write about in Envy. But then there's also this busyness that you were talking about, which has been one of the primary animating impulses in my life, which is that if you stop doing, then you have to feel everything. And it is much easier to keep the door closed and to keep the chaos of all of these emotion states, many of which we have decided are bad. It's much easier to keep them at bay by numbing through work and distraction and busyness than it is to sort of open the closet door and invite them out so that you can look at what they are. And, really the main thesis of the book is that women are programmed and conditioned for goodness, and these sins are bad. All of these appetites, all of these human impulses are quote unquote bad. So we suppress them and shove them into shadow. Men, on the other hand, who aren't the subject of my book, but they're conditioned and programmed for power. And you see sort of the inverse here, where women who seek power are deviant. Men who seek goodness are babies, weak, whatever it is, also deviant. But you can see how these sort of countervailing forces show up in our lives. And for women, it's this, I can't feel my anger. It's just complete disconnection from our appetites, what we want, what we need, and all of those impulses. To be a good woman in our culture historically has been to subjugate all of your wants to other people's needs, to live in this place of selflessness. And that's a terrible fate. Terrible.
Particularly even for mothers, we have now is a time where women feel the most empowered to go out into the workforce. We do have more ability than ever before. Obviously, there's still, systems in place that make that unequal. But historically, we're able to go after that more than ever before. And embodying that sense of power, pride to go forth is eye for ridicule. But then on top of it, that's a very masculine energy for women to tap into to get there. And then if they want to be mothers and have a family, that requires the feminine. And somehow along the way, they became responsible for both.
Yeah.
How are they able to be the most masculine to tap into their ultimate power and success in the career field, in the workforce, but then at home they have to be soft and nurturing? And a lot of research shows that the women are like the number one impact on the children's psychology and what happens, and who's picking up the slack? Where is that going? Because that hasn't disappeared. We've just taken on more roles and nothing has dropped off.
Nothing has dropped off. And I have lots of feelings about this. The primary one being that this idea of feminine energy, nurturance, care, creativity. Then you, on the other side, have balanced masculine energy, structure, order, truth. And these energies are not only available to all of us, regardless of gender, they are in us. I would argue in all people, they are and should be equally available and equally present. One of the great mythologies of this time and of patriarchy is that the male qualities really only belong to the men and the feminine qualities only belong to women, and that it is your nature as a woman to be these things. And if you are not those things, you are deviant or off. And same with men. And as we know, this is a great myth. Most women have been in their masculine for their entire lives, if not equally, then formidably, like acting as air traffic control in everyone's lives, directing people to do things. We are in our masculine all the time. And I feel like in the public, we are in our masculine, but always trying to pretend like we're not, because we recognize that we don't win points for expressing our confidence and our competence, all of these masculine qualities, at which a lot of women, most women, I would say, also excel. And so I think what we're seeing is men just lagging way behind, because it is much easier in many ways to not lean into your feminine and to not do nurturing and care, particularly when women, I experienced this in my own marriage, and I'm married to like a lovely, super progressive feminist guy. But why would he rush to do all of this stuff when I am so capable of rushing in to do it first? So part of what needs to happen is that women, we need to give permission to ourselves to relax and to step back and to let men step up in their feminine and to take on a lot of this nurturance and care. Some of that will be deeply uncomfortable, particularly because then it's like, well, who's gonna clean the house? Who's gonna do all of these things? Well, part of it is leaving the space. And I find this has been my own practice since writing the book, of just not rushing to return the signed field trip slip and letting myself take a day. And often I find in that day, my husband has actually printed it out and returned it in my stead. I mean, it's a silly example, but it's like, I don't think I'm alone and feeling like it's all on me and therefore I'm going to do it all fast and efficiently. And then he is like, well, yeah, she's going to take care of everything. So part of it is an intentional relaxing and resting, which can be really hard when everyone else around you seems to be doing a better job at delivering everywhere. But that's the sort of grace we're going to need to find for ourselves and each other.
It's funny too, even in the lens of the manifestation work, the moments where I felt like, okay, I'm going to not put the dishes away. I'm going to let him come to it at his own time. And if it's messy, I'm going to sit with my discomfort and it's okay. It's all good. And in those moments, you often are faced with a test of, that's all fine and dandy when it's just you guys home alone, but now friends are coming over for dinner. Are you going to rush to do them now? When you have the appearance of others, the eyeball of others, the comparison to others, do you want your home to be messy? So even again, like a small, I don't want to say meaningless, but like a little fractal piece of the grand scheme of it all, I think you are almost immediately tested with, yeah, you're comfortable with it now, but what about this? The little nod from the universe inviting you to say, yes, you can leave it no matter what. You're good. It's like having that deep trust.
Yeah. Well, and part of that is like a conscious reframe. And I feel like, again, going back to the work that you guys are doing and this essential starting place for many of us, where it's this subjugation of what we want to other people's needs, meaning that we've never actually even identified what we want. Honestly, getting your arms around that is revolutionary work, and part because that wanting is stuffed so deep inside so many of us. One of the things that I had to do for a number of reasons, but also as part of writing this book, was to actually identify my own wanting and to recognize that I had been worked my life for very good reason in service of other people's wants and their visions. And I had been using all of my life energy to that end, which worked out for me, and it paid bills and was great in of itself. But a big part of this is to actually spend the time to articulate what it is that you want. And I had, as a 40-something-year-old woman, had never done that. It had never occurred to me that I needed to get really, really, really clear. All I want is to write books, write a newsletter, and host a podcast. That is what I want. I try to not stray from my wanting, recognizing that wanting might also evolve and change. But so few of us do that work. And instead, as in the chapter on envy, which I actually wanted to be, envy is the gateway drug to all of the sins, because it is that gateway to our wanting, which so many of us have policed out of ourselves. It is typically only evident to us. We think of envy as so malicious, gross, dirty, shameful. And so our automatic instinct is to suppress it. And then I, in the book, argue that it comes out sideways. And this started with a conversation with psychotherapist Lori Gottlieb, who has a small aside in her book, maybe you should talk to someone, that she tells her clients to pay attention to their envy because it shows them what they want. And this was a revolutionary insight for me. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I was like, oh my God. And I asked her, is envy more present in women or men? And she didn't have the data, but she would essentially offer, she thinks women, because women will shame or suppress feelings that we think are bad. So I was like, wow, this is it. Our inability to diagnose our envy and therefore access what we want is sort of a primary part of what it is to be a woman. And what I saw culturally is that when we see another woman doing something that we want for ourselves, our inability to identify or even let that come up means that we reject and swat that woman down and typically criticize her, judge her, shame her. It becomes like, I don't like her. We can't really say why. She bugs me. She's the worst. I'm sure people listening can relate to this. I've participated in this. And again, it goes to this inability to diagnose my own wanting and my own envy, that only now do I recognize, like, those women, some women drive me crazy for good reason, who are like harming other people. And there are a lot of people in legislature right now who I do not envy and do not like. But for most of us, when you find someone who is bringing up something in you, it's because that person's pushing on a dream. And you guys have offered, and I write about this in Envy, the turnaround on that, this idea of expansion. You take that person when you can actually access, like, oh, I envy them. I want what they have. I want what they have, and I want it for myself. And when you turn that, it becomes incredibly empowering and a way to step into the life that you want for yourself, rather than this really shameful exercise of not only damning and judging another woman, but condemning yourself in the process.
There's so many layers to it, and there's so many ways that it sneaks in. People can see the obvious one where someone does something in the public eye and they're like, oh God, that's so cringe. That's a really easy one to identify envy. Like, if you're saying that's so cringe, or I don't like what they're doing, they're hitting something about you that you're repressing in yourself, and you think you would be cringe, not liked, judged, etc. And I think also envy, a lot of times there's this like, yeah, I support them, but secretly there's like brooding or stewing on the back end of what they're doing, or maybe they want to take space from that person, or it's just too triggering to be around them. And I think the idea of turning envy into expansion allows you to take your power back. and it also allows you to see it through the lens of a gift. At TBM, we always say the universe is delivering you the messages you need to receive at that time. And so instead of saying, oh my gosh, how dare this person have the gall to go out there and put themselves out there in that way, I'm going to swat them down because I don't feel like I could do it. And it makes me uncomfortable seeing someone living out the life that I wish I could have. Say, they're actually coming up right now in this very moment, so you can get that expansion and stop suppressing that inside of yourself. And it's not even like this is a general idea of envy and expansion. No, it's coming up right now because you need to look at it right now and start to shift it and perhaps take action upon it. Put your own thing out there, not copy exactly what they're doing, but what's the core essence of what they're doing that is really what you crave. Because so many times people will be like, yeah, well, I'm envious of this, I don't know, a bikini model who's super popular online. Like, how did she go and do that? Maybe your highest dream is not to be a bikini model, but maybe she's just confident in her skin. And that's something you've been covering up and hiding away for so long. And so it's not, let me go out and become a bikini model. It's, how can I start to have that embodiment within my own skin, within my own body to be out there in the world? And usually when you start to lean into the thing that you are suppressing within yourself, even just a little bit, the envy almost fully releases. It like completely transmutes. And then you can really see like, wow, this person is my expander. So over the past few years, I've started to dip my toe into the world of facials. My skin feels absolutely fantastic after, but for some reason with my busy schedule, I can never regularly enough book a time for myself to go. So when Bon Charge announced that they were coming out with a red light face mask, I was overjoyed because now I can get that same post-facial glow at home. The Bon Charge face mask has both red light and near infrared light. So that means it is not just penetrating the surface of the skin, but it's getting deep into the tissues and cells of the skin to help produce more ATP efficiently. It is helping to create more elastin, more collagen, clearer skin, help with fine lines and wrinkles, uneven skin tone, acne, and you can utilize these benefits for just 10 minutes a day. I've been using it about 3 to 4 times a week for about 15 minutes each, and every time I use it, my skin feels better and better. I also notice I have a lot of sun damage from my early years in the tanning beds, and it seems to be lightening it ever so subtly. So I highly recommend it if you are looking for a treatment for your skin or your face at home that's easy, on the go, portable. You can just charge it and walk around with it, and something that you can utilize every single day. I also get crazy with it and I will turn it around and stick it on my neck. So if you don't have any other red light therapy device at home and you have certain muscle aches or pains or tensions, you can also put that red light on those certain areas of your body as well. So multidimensional. So if you want to try out Bon Charge's red light face mask, you can use the code MAGNETIC, all caps, MAGNETIC for 15% off. Again, that's code MAGNETIC, MAGNETIC for 15% off. And you can go to boncharge.com or check out the link in the show notes. I love something else that you said in that section too, which is like, Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude, which is harm plus joy, which is our delight when things happen to other people. And this is, I'm glad you mentioned famous women, because culturally, we have a lot of delight in watching women who are visible fall. And this is where all the sins start crashing into each other. So envy Venn diagrams very closely with pride and also with anger, because a lot of the ways that we attack other women is because we have never been taught how to have good conflict and how to have appropriate aggression. We're taught to sublimate it, and that's where alliance building, gossip, et cetera, comes from. That's the anger chapter. But so Schadenfreude and pride is the delight that we have when someone, quote unquote, gets what they deserve. Typically, we don't want anyone to die, but we love it when they're sort of put back in their place, ideally sort of below us, just below us. And we all experience this on the regular. And sometimes it's amusing and we're like, oh, I'm glad that that person was indicted. Sometimes it's because justice is served. A lot of times it's sort of watching, for women at least, a famous woman fall. And pride and envy are incredibly entwined because a lot of women are scared to be seen because they don't want to inspire envy. And they recognize sort of what happens when envy, undiagnosed envy, shows up for people. But pride and women, and we can sort of say, oh, famous women, not like us, it doesn't relate. But I think that it is incredibly important for all of us to recognize the cultural pattern of women being brought down who dare to be seen, because it's effectively a shot across the bow for the rest of us. It is a warning shot of what happens when you become visible, what happens when people pay attention to you, what happens when you express your gifts in the world. And we can say, oh, I don't have anything to do with Anne Hathaway or Amy Winehouse or Princess Diana or Meghan Markle. They're completely unrelated. But we have a lot to do with these women because this is the flight plan. This is the blueprint of persecution for visible women who are showing the rest of us what's possible in the world. And we see it in business. We see it in every single category. We cheer these women on the ascent. We love them. And then they hit a certain point where it's too much, then we destroy them. Or if we're not actively destroying them, we're celebrating their destruction. And then we sort of like them, Free Britney or whatever it is. We like to sort of see them return in some form.
But wounded in a sense, or deeply humbled to where they would never have the confidence to go back up there in the way they were before.
Yes. I think it's something that we all need to be extremely cautious and conscious of, this instinct and the way that it is in all of us as just a cultural norm. And I do think a lot of it is cultural envy. It's in part because so many of us are scared to be seen or scared to express ourselves or feel like we can't really do that. And so we see another woman doing it very visibly, very publicly, and it hits our envy, it hits that shame. And so we participate in these sort of ritual hazing cycles in culture, and stopping it will require all of us to recognize that that's what's happening. That when we see hashtags like women supporting women, or during political cycles like we've got her back, this is what this is pointing to, this tendency. Those hashtags need to not exist. It's like a flag waving that this is our tendency, and we need to make that go away. We need to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so perpetuated by the media, obviously. Like, you even see the dynamic that occurred recently with Hailey Bieber and Selena Gomez. Like, TikTok was going like wildfire, so much so that I think both of them had to come out and be like, we don't condone hate, please stop. We're fine, or we'll solve this problem between us, but like, please don't get involved. This is, they were getting death threats on certain levels. Like, the nature to which people are just blindly trying to project their own emotions onto it. And we're all guilty of it, but I think it can go to extremes for some people, especially if they feel really out of control in other parts in their life. And I've definitely been on both sides of that and try very mindfully to always check myself when I start leaning in the judgment category. And especially being, co-hosting on Expanded, the volume I was not prepared for of messages dissecting their dislike about me was just, okay, gotta
Jessica,
stomach this.
It's wild, right? You're like, but you don't have to listen.
Yes. And I think there's a cycle that happens when I see comments like that. There's oh no, what do I need to fix about myself? To wait. It's okay for not everyone to like me. I'm okay. It's all right. I can keep going. To, this is my job. This is my livelihood. Like, what if the whole world turns against me and everybody hates me, And it's just this kind of then reassurance.
But you understand two major things happening there, right? One is the projection of people who are like, I would do a better job. Like, this is what they want for themselves. And therefore, they feel compelled to offer commentary on what you're doing. And if you tap into that for yourself, like, what would inspire you to criticize someone else? Because sometimes people, same thing, I'll get feedback. Some of it's really good, valid feedback. Some of it is like, oh, I think you want a podcast. You should have a podcast. Like, that's the whole point. Anyone can have a podcast. It's incredibly accessible. So much of it is about them and not you. And then the other thing I would say for women is, who does she think that she is to be heard and to use her voice? And that's the feedback that sometimes makes me laugh, because it's my podcast. I have a podcast too. And people are tuning in theoretically to hear you and to hear Lacey, and then to say, like, stop, talk less. But I'm sure you get this. When I was hosting, Goop, it was, I hate her voice. I love her voice. She should talk less. She should talk more. She should be more prepared. She should be less prepared. I mean, it's like, there's no winning. But so much of it is really about this central idea of, like, who do you think you are to take up space, to use your voice, to be seen, to be heard, in our case. And a lot of that, people don't even understand the programs that they're running in themselves. They don't even know. They think it's you, but it's really in themselves.
I think it's also this element of, who do they think they are if they are not my definition of perfection?
Right.
Because I think so many times people don't think that they can be seen, launch their podcast, put themselves out there until they work on every little thing about them, until they're at perfection. And so when they see humanness in real form on a public eye, they're like, wait, you're not supposed to be human up there. Like, you can only be up there if you're perfect, and you're not perfect. So why are you there? It's like such that vitriol. Truly, it's against themselves, but then it comes out in these other forms. I love how you said so many times in the book, it is a dance between checking when we have that feeling towards others and then redirecting it towards ourselves, using it to empower ourselves. But then also knowing, when you put yourself out there, it's okay to be scared, and you should reward yourself for putting yourself out there, period. Like, that's the win.
And so much of life, and I have some years on you, but I can promise you, we have this ascension model of life that is very flawed. It's this up and to the right, up and to the right. This is the way of the market. This is the way of eternal expansion and ascension. This is, you lift yourselves up by the bootstraps and you work hard and you get to that finish line, and more. And it's very linear and it's very up. And when you live for long enough, you recognize that life is up and a lot of downs. And I can say, honestly, as someone who had sort of reached a pinnacle of some sort in my career, that's when you spin out and you find yourself back at the bottom. Like, that is life. Stuff is happening to all of us all the time, both visible and invisible. Loss of health, loss of job, loss of relationship, loss of life. And this is how we get bigger. It's this spiraling, oscillating, circular. Women understand this intimately. We cycle every month, but we're in a system that would insist otherwise, right? Up and to the right, up and to the right, growth. So this idea of perfecting yourself before you put yourself out there is such a fallacy. Life is all small deaths, get bigger, small death, get bigger, fall off, get up, fall off, get up. The more people recognize that and stop waiting, there is no finish line. There's no, that's how we started this conversation. There's no moment when you are like, I have made it, I'm safe. And again, going to sort of famous women, or this idea of like onward ascension, or that there will become a point in their life when they've done enough and are going to retire. Like, that's not how life works either. We're in it all together, all the time, cycling in and out.
Talk a little bit about the release. You talk about this invisibility cloak that you felt as a ghostwriter of so many best-selling books, and also working for massive brands and kind of being behind the scenes, but able to tap into your genius without judgment, not really have to put yourself out there for it, to becoming much more visible. And then, obviously being the host of Goop podcast and then on Goop Lab. And you talked about the day that the show aired. What came up for you? Talk about what, like, the dynamic you wanted to hear from your parents, what actually happened, the process that you went through, putting yourself out there in the most visible way you had. What was that like?
It's so funny. Yeah, the day that the Netflix show came out, I was in New York City and I was working. I was in the studio recording episodes of the show, of the podcast, and I interviewed this psychologist, Craig Melkin, who wrote this book called The Upside of Narcissism, I think. It's had a couple of different titles, but it's essentially about healthy narcissism and this need that we all have, this very human need to be seen and validated and reflected. And that's what happens in a healthy childhood is your parents aren't pumping you full of air, but they really behold you. They understand who you are and show that to you. I think it's because I'm a girl. I know it's because I'm a girl, partially, even though I had very progressive, incredibly supportive parents. The consistent and insistent messaging throughout my life was be excellent, but invisible. Do not show off. Do not get a big head, sort of this tall poppy syndrome. And I was a high achieving child. I was a nationally ranked competitive skier. I was a mathlete, but my parents really paid intently very little attention to anything that I achieved, which is interesting because I was so driven to achieve, I think, so that they would validate me, rinse and repeat. So anyway, I'm in New York. I'm talking to Craig about healthy narcissism. I was used to getting a fair amount of press because there's just so much interest around the brand. My parents just didn't comment. It's like they didn't put the date in their calendar. I didn't hear from them at all. And in some ways, maybe that's a gift that there's so little narcissism in my parents that they're not looking to sort of claim all of my achievements as their own. But it's definitely, I think, more from fear. And it's funny, I wrote this piece for the January issue of Oprah magazine about wholeness as the new wellness. And in her sort of monthly intentions video, Oprah shouted me out, which is thrilling. That was like a life achievement moment. And my parents, even though they've read my book and me talking about their inability to acknowledge when anything happens to me, good or bad, I sent the link to my family text chain. And my brother was in Senegal or something. And he side texted me and asked me to send him the article. And we talked about it, et cetera. My parents, nothing. Don't say anything. And then a couple days later, my brother sends a text. My brother's a bird watcher. And he sends a text that his photo of a bird had made it to the homepage of birdwatchersunited.com or something. And my parents are like, oh my God, Ben, that's amazing. Just this explosion of enthusiasm and congratulations and goodwill. And I was like, I texted them. I was like, I just need to point out to you, I couldn't get a single acknowledgement from you that Oprah said my name. It's really funny. It's a huge block for them, huge. And I think it really comes from this knowing all too well of what happens to visible women and their very strong preference for me to do excellent work unseen. But the reality is I'm already scared. I don't need them to be underlining my reasons to be scared. It's terrifying. Honestly, I'd much rather be in the side curtains. And I've never wanted to be the thing, but here we are.
Well, it's interesting too, because although I can imagine that probably really hurt in a lot of ways. And I'm sure you've looked at it through therapy and all these things and the reparenting of it all, but it is a beautiful opportunity that when we put our needing of validation, and we all do it, we need validation from our parents for whatever need wasn't met in childhood. We're waiting for that. Even if we want to pretend we're not anymore, at least one part of our inner child is still longing for that acknowledgement. But it leaves a beautiful opportunity for acceptance of their limitations and the ability to then go in and say, I'm the only person's acceptance, approval, cheerleading that I need. Like it really all comes back to the self. And I just want you to share this so anyone here who like identifies with this story can like go to a inner child DI or something and like say this to themselves. But what was the messaging that you wish you had heard that day that would have given you that confidence or feeling of being held?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like actually shortly before this, and this was the Netflix thing was something I had observed, but shortly before that, I had started doing, I did a series of 3 MDMA therapeutic sessions with an underground therapist. And I wrote about some of the revelations from that session in the chapter on lust. The idea is you take two doses of therapeutic, like high, very, very clean MDMA or ecstasy. You're with the therapist. You put on eye shades, you put on headphones, you go deep within yourself. It's theoretically would be called a hallucinogen, but it's not. It's a very embodied experience. It's sort of the opposite. You're driven deep into yourself. In that session, that first session, honestly, I had no idea what to expect. I'm listening to music and it's not even blurred out. I was just like, oh, I was molested by a friend of a family friend when I was a kid. And the therapist is there. They're supportive. They're taking notes. But the idea really is that you're talking. They're not leading you. The only thing that they're doing is asking you to sort of stay where you are and to be with that child, because you have this perception of observing yourself as a little kid and being removed and being yourself. Anyway, it was what's really powerful about the drug, and they use it for PTSD, is because it mutes the amygdala or the fear response. And so you're able to access all of these memories and this information without feeling re-triggered or overwhelmed. In this process, I had this experience of myself as this sort of sparkling little girl. I was very precocious. I had short hair like I do now. I think I was just different, much in this way that my older son is, actually. I was able to really see that. And then with my parents, to recognize that I think that scared them and they didn't know how to protect me. It's really interesting with a child, and again, I see this with my son. It's like, I don't want to dim his light or stop him from being himself. And yet I also recognize, and I think it's all innocent at this point, how much interest people have in him and in talking to him and in his mind and how cute he is. And it's different, I think, for little girls. And so what I think I wanted from my parents was an acknowledgement of that and help processing that attention, which, as I learned, was not always safe or positive. And feeling like they were just ignoring it and pretending like it wasn't happening rather than acknowledging that and helping me understand it. And so I was able, to your question, to do that in that moment for myself, reparenting that little girl in me who at a very young age learned it's dangerous to be seen. And now I think for women, that's the constant fight of our lives, which is recognizing that when we draw attention to ourselves, even if it's not our intent, whatever happens to us is our fault. We will be weaponized against ourselves. We see this certainly with sexual assault and cultures of rape, but it trickles down to all parts of life. And the way that our bodies are used against us is just ongoing evidence of that.
By now, you're starting to get the feel for TBM. Maybe you've heard about our workshops and you're interested in manifestation, but you just don't have the time or energy to sit down and do self-help work. We totally get it. In fact, that's why we created the Daily Practice, which is our massive library of self-hypnosis tracks that you can do anytime without having to jump into a workshop. We call these tracks our Deep Imaginings, or DIs. DIs are different than normal meditations because we designed them using a combination of self-hypnosis techniques, deep theta waves, EMDR-informed tools, and somatic experiencing. A fully loaded formula that is scientifically proven to help you clear your blocks and triggers on a subconscious level, giving you the power to actually create new neural pathways in your brain. So if your boss pisses you off, use our trigger DI. If you want to feel magnetic before a party or an important meeting, use the magnetic self DI. If you're feeling anxious or down on yourself or you need help making a decision, we've got a DI for all of these scenarios and more. You can get full access to the daily practice inside the Pathway membership, where you'll also get unlimited access to every workshop, tool, and offering from TBM. The tools in the Pathway membership will support you year-round, whether you're in the worst, a rock bottom, or second worst, a rut, or feeling good and you want to keep the magnetism going. In the Pathway, you'll effectively learn how to become your own manifestation coach, all for less than $1 a day. So even if you're not ready to start a workshop, join the Pathway and start rewriting your neural pathways now to create magnetism. Work through your triggers and get closer to your authentic magnetic self in order to manifest. Use our special code MAGNETIC, all caps, MAGNETIC, to receive $20 off your first TBM purchase. Again, that's all caps, MAGNETIC. Now back to the episode.
I think the interesting thing that you hit on in so many parts of the book too is this concept of both and. Let's not say, just be confident and proud of yourself and not envious, and the world will applaud you for it. Life will be better. You may run up against the really hard, for lack of a better word, shitty things that are out of our control. That may happen. But having a life unlived, unfulfilled, unsought, for me, I have this sort of grandiose hope for society that we can take everything one step further, that we can push the boundaries. That is almost our responsibility for being on this planet at this time, to move the conversation forward, to free ourselves from these deadly sins, to be in balance with the sins. And, to almost quote Glennon Doyle in this, we can do hard things. And I think the other piece is being of good community and safe community to each other, to support each other when those things, or if those things happen. Instead of being the person that's leaving nasty comments or passing judgment or shame when someone does different, or someone does something that we think the culture is going to dislike, can we celebrate them? Can we remedy our own judgment or envy within us, our own suppressed feelings of lust or hunger? Can we look at that in ourselves and say, no, you're pushing us forward. You're carving a path so it is safe to go there, and I'll stand by you. How can we start to create those spaces that, okay, it might not be safe in the world, but I will try to be safe, a safe person for you to stand next to.
I love that. And I agree. I mean, I was nodding my head aggressively as you were talking. I do think that we are at the next stage in our collective evolution. And again, it goes to this, like, it vacillates. It's not up and to the right when hard things happen, as they have collectively for years. It's our opportunity to get bigger and to get to the next level of evolution and consciousness. And I do believe that the feminine in all of us is what will lead us forward. And we've had enough order and structure, and we've seen how that can get toxic. And it's time not to burn it down, but to move it forward, rebalance it, make it more equitable, make it more sane, make it more sustainable, or just sustainable would be good, period. And women will lead the way. I talk about, women have been outperforming men in school for a century. Many of us are working, as discussed, multiple jobs, both for money and unpaid jobs of care. So women are not afraid of hard work. Women are incredibly intelligent and competent. And, I feel like we're boxers training at high altitude who have come down to sea level to fight. Put us in and watch out, And I think the more energy that we can use for that work, even if you don't want to get behind all of the women in your life, if you can at least stop acting against them and preserve your energy and allow them to preserve theirs, I can only imagine how much farther we'll get. And if you can use your energy to support other women, even better.
I think too, it's this invitation, this word gets thrown out there a lot, but this authenticity, the authentic self, like getting back to our true authenticity. And I think true authenticity is recognizing that there is space for everyone, that we can create space for every unique gift of everyone, and that one person's shine is not going to take away from another. Understanding like the nuances and depths and shadows of yourself isn't going to make you unlovable. How do we first accept them and embrace them within ourselves? Because until we do that, we're still kind of like tiptoeing out in the world, waiting for the world to do it for us. It's not gonna. You have to do it first. You have to lead by example, be the role model.
And that idea is so important too, because I think we all get so confined by our unexpressed wanting. We get sort of this tunnel vision, I think, when we don't bring it up and air it out and really examine it. And so we get into this fixed idea that we all want the same things, or that we should all want the same things. What's wild is that we don't, and that we have such a tremendous variety of gifts. And I think about this all the time when I sort of get into a spiral about what's happening in the world. And then, it's the look for the helpers, Mr. Rogers advice, but you start looking and you're like, look at these incredible people serving the world in completely different ways. And it's quite stunning, really, when you think about how differently gifted we all are and differently situated. And what would happen if we could all fully use our gifts in the world?
I mean, that gets me thinking too about the concept you had in there about the wolf pack and the dog packs, and this idea of the alpha versus omega, and how it's really a patriarchal viewpoint that the alpha is the dominant, that it's almost idealistic thinking that everyone wants to be the alpha. And when you really look at it, the omega is the one that had the most impact on the system at large. How can we find the omegas and those who thrive in that role and love to be in that role and celebrate that, and don't see that as, oh yeah, that's just behind the scenes? Well, that's actually one of the most important roles.
No, I love that revelation. That was from Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste. Yeah, that the omega is the one that's the most mourned, the most essential to the pack. And yeah, that's patriarchal, to focus solely on sort of the leader, the alpha, the one who is sort of drawing all attention. And presumably, this gets to like the mythology in America, at least, of the self-made man. And women, you don't see any women really beating their chests about that or lifting that myth over their heads, because I think inherently we understand like what co-creation is. We're used to sharing our bodies. We understand how many people are involved in anything that emerges. And I don't know, it's interesting. I think it's like a specifically masculine perspective, this idea that you can do anything by yourself. I think most women recognize that as terribly untrue.
Terribly untrue. I mean, even if you take the process of sitting and creating art, in that process, you are channeling something that is a collective genius, however everyone chooses to think of it. But I think of it as like a higher universal source channeling through to deliver messages to who needs it. And I just happen to be the vessel. And in that, the co-creation is not self-made, but it doesn't mean I can't be proud that I sat down and got myself in a chair to create the art. It's that balance of the two.
Yes. Absolutely. I think we are all, and women are used to being vessels. Like we have that physical capacity built into us, but that's co-creation. That is working with the divine to bring something down into the world. And if it's not you, it's someone else or multiple people. Anyone who's listening understands, like, this is why ideas emerge in different parts of the world simultaneously from different people. It's an idea that's having its moment and it's its time, and whoever is tuned in and listening will bring it through. It doesn't mean that it's a wholly owned subsidiary or that it's exclusive material. It's just some of us, a lot of women, are good at listening. And now it's time for us to bring it through. You know, there's this woman, Carol Gilligan, who's a psychologist whose work is formative for a lot of other psychologists. She's getting old now. And she wrote this book called In a Different Voice. And it was about girls developing and then disconnecting from their own voices. I find this so moving. She wrote this book with this woman, Naomi Snyder, relatively recently called Why Does Patriarchy Persist? And they have this line about what happens with the development of children and the insertion of the word don't into their vocabulary. And for boys, it becomes I don't care. And for girls, it becomes I don't know. What I would offer is that boys care, and we desperately need them to reconnect to that caring. And women and girls know. We know deeply and profoundly. And the more we can tap into that knowing and then share it with the world, the more likely it is that in this next phase, this next evolution, that we can truly come into balance. I really believe that.
I mean, I feel like your book is one of those pieces that is channeled in the collective because the messages need to come through at this time in such a way. And I'm so interested to see what people take from it and then enact, change their life and change others' lives, and the ripple effect of these truths in the world, because I'm just like, oh, wow, this could be part of that movement.
That would be amazing. And what I wanted to do was identify the system or framework, because I would see sort of, we see it all over our culture, right? A book about women and money, a book about women and food, et cetera. And each one of those things is an important offering that's part of this whole. And I wanted to find the whole system, which feels so obvious. And so my hope is that it does become a framework, this ancient morality system, which has lodged in women and was first assigned to Mary Magdalene, which is insane, but that we as a touch point can refer back to this and talk about it with each other. And a lot of this is work that you guys are already sort of helping people do. But the more that we tell the truth about our lives, the more that we start to identify these forces that are driving us, the greater the hope that we can change the channel, tell a different story, do something differently in the world. I really think it can happen through women gathering, women talking, and women self-examining. And so I hope people buy the book and enjoy the book, but I also think like maybe the idea is enough for people to start to identify this in their lives and work to set themselves free.
Could you go through the sins? And you had it at the beginning of the chapters. You know, if sloth is a sin, then we are denying ourselves rest. Could you go through those so people can just sit with, oh, wow, I didn't realize the impact that had?
Yes, with pleasure. So, sloth, believing sloth to be sinful, we deny ourselves rest. Envy, believing envy to be sinful, we deny our own wanting. Pride, believing pride to be sinful, we deny our own talents. Gluttony, believing gluttony to be sinful, we deny our own hunger. Greed, believing greed to be sinful, we deny our own security. Lust, Believing lust to be sinful, we deny our own pleasure. Anger. Believing anger to be sinful, we deny our own needs. Sadness. Believing sadness to be sinful, we deny our own feelings.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Elise. Thank you for putting this out into the world, for being brave and vulnerable and compilating all of the incredible conversations and wisdom and knowledge and lifetime and everything to put this in this book. It is so needed. I am so thankful for it. I've seriously have highlighted almost every single page in her book. I highly recommend it to everyone. It is the new, gospel, so to speak, in a lot of ways of understanding ourselves, our limiting beliefs, and where we are imposing a glass ceiling on our life, on our fulfillment, on our joy, on our soul, and changing it for the future and future generations.
Thank you. You're the best.
Thank you so much, Elise.
Of course. Bye.
I hope you all enjoyed that episode as much as we did. And if you're starting to get a feel for this to be magnetic manifestation process, but aren't completely sold yet, let me point you to some of our free offerings. You can check out the expanded podcast episode called How to Manifest Anything You Desire, where Lacey, the founder, and I break down exactly what this process is all about. You can check out The Motivation, which is our testimonial library with thousands of testimonials of people who have manifested wild things using this process. Or you can check out our free mini workshop to find out why you're not manifesting and listen to one of our proprietary deep imagining audios, where it's going to help you drop into your theta state and overwrite low self-worth limiting beliefs. Enjoy. We'll see you next week.